Okay, there we are. All right. Hello again, everyone, for the fourth day of your XTC 2022 Bootcamp. As you know, XTC is focused on responsible innovation that can significantly improve society and the environment while also being high growth investments. And we cover an amazingly wide range of deep technology, advanced materials, biomedical devices, clean energy, and also serious interactive educational services, democratized fintech on the blockchain. In short, really tough tech, hard tech, and a lot of it hardware tech. Hard tech takes time, money, and sophisticated engineering, standing apart from the great bulk of startups. And so this morning we have an especially suitable expert in this realm to talk about how we should envision scaling up hard tech. Duncan Turner is a general partner of SOSV Venture Capital. SOSV is an incubating investor that's actively involved in the product and business development of its selective portfolio. And if you look them up, they are focused specifically on responsible innovation for the betterment of humanity and also high growth overseas markets, both core sweet spots of extreme tech challenge. And I'm going to ask, I will check, but if each person can mute as they come on, we'll appreciate that. And one of SOSV's focused acceleration programs is something called HAX, H-A-X, which is the world's first and largest accelerator specifically devoted to this hard tech topic. And Duncan is the head of HAX and has been devoted to this hard market for nearly 8 years through a number of different cycles and trends. And I'll mention that we've already had a question thread running through several previous sessions this week about the challenges of limited government and corporate funding for truly fundamental hard tech breakthroughs. So once again, please enter your questions into chat for later. Duncan, welcome, and please tell us about that hard path to scaling up.
Thanks a lot. So I have a presentation now. Should I start share?
Yeah, please.
Screen share? Yeah, okay. So if you just hang on a minute. And you should see that now. Is that working?
It's coming. Yes, there we are.
Okay, great. Okay, so thanks a lot for having me present. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Duncan. I'm general partner at SOSV and look after HAX, which is one of SOSV's programs. So SOSV is, as mentioned, focused on early stage hard tech. We are currently investing out of a $277 million fund. We have programs throughout the world, mostly in America and Asia. Most people know us through two programs, particularly in the hard tech space, which is IndieBio, focusing on life sciences, and HAX, focusing on hard tech. I'm responsible for HAX along with the rest of our team, so it definitely is a village. We have offices around the world, flagship ones in Shenzhen and recently in Newark, New Jersey, that really focus on helping the teams with the engineering expertise and execution that we have. But then smaller offices in Tokyo and San Francisco. And just to give you a quick flavor of the type of facilities we have, we have around 40 full-time staff across the locations, ranging everything from chemical engineering to electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, software development, supply chain management, industrial design, marketing, pretty much all the little bits that a hard tech company needs to do outside of focusing on the core technology to help them scale. And we've really found that model works well indeed. And through it, we've invested in a very large number of hard tech companies. So around 500. If you combine IndieBio and HAX, these focus on a range of different new industries like cellular agriculture. They've been very big in that space, through to energy systems, manufacturing, robotics, across all of those different sectors, and then also healthcare. And we're kind of unique as an investor. We really like to invest very early on with companies, often before they even have a proper prototype. This is a good example of companies that kind of come to us at this sort of stage. They've got a proof of principle. This was a navigation they'd shown, and through a program with us, we kind of help them turn that company into something that has a value proposition which is appropriate for a particular market, in this case, industrial inspection, starting with transport, and then just help them scale up to, you know, as large as they want to go. And here's actually a very nerdy CEO looking very pleased in himself with a very large number of the robots that he developed through, it's now a 3-year-old company called UiBot. Yeah, as mentioned, we absolutely love HardTech. Why? Because kind of as mentioned earlier, but particularly to us, we really see there's these 3 massive investment themes at the moment that are being driven by HardTech companies. The first and possibly most important being planetary health. I think it's been really good for us to see that planetary health has really exploded over the past couple of years. It's been an area we've been investing in now since 2015, but really great to see a lot of great other investors and new stage funds just in raising capital to help really that sector grow. Human health, which is very important to us, and we do a lot of investment into the healthcare system, and makes us feel great about running a fund. Although I haven't actually concentrated too much on human health in this presentation, really because I find the healthcare system is you know, quite complex, and it's difficult to draw quick kind of insights across the whole industry. But do ask me in the questions if you've got particular kind of in question time, particular questions around human health and our approach to that. Be more than happy to answer it. It represents about 25% of what I do, of what we do, sorry. And then the last, and this is a you know, an area that we're pushing quite heavily, is industrial independence. And what we mean by that is, if you just look at the global supply chain has kind of become fragmented recently for a number of different reasons. COVID definitely sparked that, but then now also a push to make sure that a lot of high-tech manufacturing is done in local areas versus relying on global supply chains, means that there's a huge gap in not just in one place, but in all over the world, in China, in Europe and the US, to innovate and grow the ability to manufacture high-tech items that are really important to the infrastructure of the country. And so we see that as a great area for startups to be operating in. It brings wealth to different areas, and also helps overall set up for transition into electric grids away from fossil fuels, and overall supports the requirements we have to get to a healthy planet. So at this point I would normally start talking about HardTech and some of our approaches to that. But what I've really noticed recently is that everybody keeps asking me about a pullback in financial systems, what that means for HardTech. And I know this is being recorded, so I want to make it clear this is the 25th of May at the moment, 2022. So everything could change, and I don't profess to look into the future and know what's going to happen. But there is certainly some some interesting times at the moment. And so I thought I would just kind of cover that off and repeat some of the advice that we've been giving founders around this area, to kind of make sure that you're kind of protecting your business in uncertain times. I would say that for context, we are coming off the highest point on record for VC ever. So if you just look at the number of even early stage deals last year, in 2021, was actually almost double what it was in 2020. And 2020 was already a really big year. I think, it equaled 2018. Another good metric is just to look at the number of new unicorns, so privately valued over $1 billion companies. In 2020, there were around 150 in the whole year. And then in 2021, there's been roughly 150 per quarter. So you can just see there's been this enormous acceleration in venture capital. So to come back from that, I would see it as, not a terrifying prospect. Just important to put that in context. But nonetheless, I think capital will start to become constrained, potentially at the seed and Series A, fairly soon. Maybe within the next year, maybe not. A lot of the pullbacks have been in kind of growth stage SaaS investments. But anyway, it's important just to watch out and raise now if you can. If you're talking to an investor, I would encourage a little bit of safety rather than kind of thinking, oh, this will just pass. Particularly if you're talking to me, obviously, but I'm just joking. Anyway, so just kind of 7 thoughts, and some of these will seem like common sense to some people, although I do just want to make sure that, particularly when you're developing hard tech, it's often a trap that I see founders falling into, which they really fall in love with their tech and think their tech is so amazing, and it often is, and they just forget about some of the practical constraints where funding is maybe being cut back a little bit. So forgive me, some of these seem a little bit simple, but I think, if you look back at your business, do make sure they apply. So the first one is, to prioritize early commercial traction with tech milestones. A lot of companies, I noticed, kind of get really really excited about their own tech and will just give milestones to investors around that tech and haven't really prioritized some of the early commercial wins. And I think that particularly at this time, even if it means scaling back some of your tech to doing something much simpler, it's a good thing to do if you can start to just show that you are able to generate revenue, talk to customers, and prove that you can actually deliver your technology into the world. I've got some great examples of this. So a company that we had called Neptune Robotics came to us with a technology that was going to essentially look at the underneath of container ships and assess the amount of biomass there, and then kind of give reports on where and when they should go for cleaning. And very quickly realized that actually most of the money was in the cleaning itself. So pivoted the business towards a robot that could actually go onto these ships and clean the biomass off themselves. And what was very interesting about how they approached that is it was during a time that they're based in Hong Kong, most of their capital comes from China. At the time, China was going through a bit of a pullback, which wasn't really experienced in the US. And so rather than just talking about the tech, they really concentrated on doing insider rounds with us, getting the tech up to a point at which we could actually go and prove out that we had revenue coming from and had LOIs in place. And then together with the tech milestones for scaling up those robots, we're able to go and raise. And they did a fantastic round recently. Sequoia Matrix led it. Sequoia Matrix led it. And I should just mention, in each of these cases that I've shown here, I really wanted to just highlight companies that have raised very recently or are raising very recently. So those are ones that are proving that there is that they're kind of resilient to some of the tension in the market. Second point is to assume that money will not be as easy as it has been. So what does this mean? Well, I would say that if you're a company that has a very large CapEx requirement, you're maybe building a plant-sized device, or you've got very large robotics infrastructure or something else. Often you'll think, well, I want to pay for that and build that myself. And project financing has been available to startups in the past, although it's a little bit tedious to get. More often than not, what I'll ask startups is, hey, look, your customer's balance sheet is probably much stronger than yours. Can you get them to apply for financing for this, or go into some kind of arrangement with them so that you can remove that from your fundraising requirements, which has been really successful for a couple of companies we work with. Another one is, and this is kind of interesting, you may have heard this before, but even for hard tech companies, if you can kind of associate what you're doing to more SaaS metrics, so monthly recurring revenue and churn, you'll notice that when you've got a piece of hardware or hard tech into somebody's plant or into someone's business, and it's really, it's been installed into the infrastructure and it's really driving value, even though you're charging much like a software business would on a monthly basis or an annual basis, you'll find that your retention is much better. And that has meant that you can kind of expand out quite a few of the investors that you're talking to more traditional SaaS investors who are okay with some of the risk of the hardware because they see the upside for retention. Bear in mind, a lot of those investors actually, they have invested into companies that still require huge amounts of money to continue the growth and to constantly fight retention, which is something that hardware-enabled software companies have less of an issue with. Company of ours that did a fantastic job of this is a company called SmartX based in Portugal. They're basically looked at a problem that exists at the moment in the fabric industry, whereby when textile gets made on a roll, it gets manually inspected, and they basically instead of having manual inspection, which identifies a problem and then will get rid of the whole roll, they have a sensors and software embedded inside the circular knitting machines, which allows them to immediately stop the knitting machines if there's a problem, and then also provide kind of software a software overview of the of how productive the machines in the factory have been, which is really helpful for them in appealing to investors who understand that business model. And investors, this is the third point, investors do have different criteria that will really resonate with them. Just to go back to SmartX, another thing I think they did really well indeed was not only did they show that they've got a really solid business which has very low retention costs and zero churn, they also showed that they can really make an impact on the world by reducing waste. And I think that it's, as you start to get more and more climate tech investors coming into the space, those investors are sophisticated in what they're doing. They understand environmental impact. They've got often different ways to look at that. And I'd really encourage founders that realize if you do have a climate impact, that it's very important to make sure that you've done everything you can to investigate and explain that objectively, so that investors can rely on that, and it can just broaden the number of investors and type of investors that you can speak to for a potential round. Another thing is that things are changing definitely within our world. A number of recent events have happened which throw up all sorts of challenges for us, and it's important to be able to respond to those quickly. Startups have the unique ability to do that large corporations obviously don't, because they're much more nimble, smaller. One of our companies, I think, did a really fantastic job with this. Volt Storage, their name, they had a residential energy storage solution using vanadium redox flow, and really just kind of saw around a year ago that there was this big push towards renewables that was particularly now been exaggerated by the crisis that's happening in Europe at the moment. And that their core technology, which was vanadium redox flow, and another technology they've been pioneering called iron salt, actually made a fantastic technology foundation for long duration energy storage. And so pivoted quickly. And I would say that previously, when they were looking at residential energy storage, they had a very small number of investors that would appeal to that market. And since doing this pivot, and at the right time with the changes in the market, just the number of investors that have been interested in them has expanded dramatically. The world really evolves at speed, and this is just kind of to think about not just challenges, but there's behaviors that are changing the whole time as well. Who would have known 2.5 years ago that we would all go through a process of wearing masks for a year and a half? We'd be working from home. And I think one of the opportunities here is for startups to see some of these changes happen, think about what's being accelerated by this change that was already there, and then how do I create a business around that? And without doubt, the most successful example of this is a company in our portfolio called R0, who were formed at the start of the pandemic, wanting to bring a better class of disinfection, sterilization to the market by utilizing UVC versus chemicals. And they've just been on an absolute tear ever since, closed their Series B. So this started with us, just kind of, a pre-seed level. And then within 2 years, they've done a Series B investment with some top investors on board, and revenues going absolutely fantastic. And really that was all through them just seeing the changes in the market and then having a maniacal focus on being able to push the technology that they had been researching into the world. They've now become the first people to have a far UV, and they're having an upper room UV technology, which can be completely installed into the infrastructure of buildings. And actually, it's a good point. Like if I look back at those 4 companies that I think have been successful recently, they all have one thing in common, which is just they operate at incredible speed. And that's something that needs to be embedded into the DNA of hard tech companies, as otherwise you can get very much lost in product development and technology and not thinking about speed to market. Second last point was just kind of understanding some of the macro risks in the spaces that you're in, and that also some opportunities. I mean, inflation is a problem for us, but it's also, you know, it's being driven by supply chain shocks and by an underinvestment in a range of different areas. But that also provides opportunities for startups to talk about how their technology is fighting that. Secure, one of our companies, great example. I won't go too much into what they do, but effectively their technology reduces the need to burn fossil fuels for a range of different applications. And previously they'd been very much focused on you know, climate impact, because they have a huge carbon impact in what they do. But then the secondary point of this was looking at, okay, long-term energy prices are actually going to be very high, and so that's an additional layer of support on which really helps investors understand why companies are going to continue to want to push this type of technology. Similarly, even though we may be heading towards a recession, we don't know if we are or not, but we may be, manufacturing and infrastructural development is still going to be required. And so, you know, I would particularly encourage companies that have the potential to have B2G contracts as well. I know they are slow, and there's multiple reasons why you don't want to have government, particularly as an only customer. But if you have some government contracts, it is good, because those are very stable, and particularly when we might be moving towards a time of instability. And, you know, again, another just mega trend that I think is so important is this trust in global supply chains that's really been eroded. And we see that on two levels. One is just the ability to actually have those supply chains running as they did in the past, and therefore people wanting to, you know, reshore or onshore manufacturing. The second is that actually a lot of the technology should be made in the area that it's being used, particularly high tech infrastructural components. You can see this with semiconductors. So it's just a huge investment now in putting semiconductor manufacturing back in the US, and that's I think just the start of a trend. And you know, this is great news for hard tech startups, because they do have the ability to provide serious value in this area. Again, with planetary health, like, I think for me, that's been a huge part of what we do, and we absolutely love the space. I don't think there's going to be too much of a pullback. If there is, it'll be hopefully temporary. I would say one thing to watch out for is just, I could see an ESG backlash coming, because you know, this is just one anecdotal point about Elon Musk, love him or hate him, but makes a good point that it's potentially different from climate tech. And so if you're in that space, I think it's definitely important to really make sure that you have a robust climate tech claims around what you're doing, and can stick by that. And whenever you've got these huge moves in the market, I always think it's nice to kind of identify some of the tangential challenges and opportunities. So if you look at, for example, food, and how cellular agriculture has just kind of become this enormous category with a huge number of companies, some of them are listed here, which are really exciting. I would see that areas that, you know, that has exploded. There'll probably be some consolidation there, but what's been really exciting for us is seeing startups like these recently invested in that are all kind of what I call the picks and shovels of the cultured meat industry. So they're companies that are having a unique approach to manufacturing and scaling the technology, which will ultimately bring the cost of some of those fantastic companies down to something which is affordable for everyone. And I think that's, you know, I'm not saying don't go and do a bioreactor company. I'm just saying that it's a common theme I can see across a range of different areas. So, you know, one abstract one I like to talk about is mining at the moment. You know, we talk so much about electrification, which is great. We're going to need a huge amount of materials. And really, the investment into modernizing mining hasn't really happened over the past 20 years. It's starting to happen now. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for companies that are looking to improve productivity for miners. Similarly, manufacturing. I mean, we've got this kind of really interesting company called Q5D who came to us and said, hey, look, you know, electricity that is used in, for example, cars goes on these wiring harnesses, which are these days all completely manual process of installing them and threading them and joining them together. And as we move towards electrification, that's just going to exponentially increase in both complexity, but also in the need for it to be done properly. And so they have a technology which can automate that. So it's effectively a robotic system that enables you to 3D print onto plastic injection molded parts and into other areas, and then removing the need for creating these very complex harnesses. So those are kind of like 7 sort of bits of advice that I'd give to startups. I've got one bonus one, which is to find a deep tech community or a hard tech community that really pushes you forward. And absolutely objectively, I would say you should look at IndieBio and Hacks. No, I'm just kidding. There's so many around, but we in particular, we're looking to support pre-seed founders. We have kind of flexible investment to suit a range of different VC companies and a community to help. And so, yeah, I've got time now for questions. Yeah, look forward to hear from you. I'll stop my share.
Okay, well, I will combine a couple of these that have come in on chat that is basically about your comment of pivoting quickly and incredible speed, which is often limited when you're dealing with hardware as opposed to software and components and supply chains. Any further thoughts on how you pivot quickly with component-laden hardware?
Yeah, it's really difficult. You're right. Yeah. So I think that what you need to do is look at what are the bits of the hardware that you've created that can pivot and which bits cannot, and see where it's possible to pivot in a short period of time. My comment was also not that they were able to actually complete the pivot quickly, more just that they started the pivot quickly. But it's something that needed to happen and has definitely proven to be very successful for them. You don't want to be, even if you're kind of 70% down the road with the technology, if the market shifted, there's no point in continuing to do that remaining 30% if it's not hitting the needs of the startup, of the market.
Another question is about hard tech outside of, say, US, Europe, and China. We have some interesting companies in LATAM and India and Africa, and they're coming up with some great ideas, but just the whole infrastructure, both investing and components, is a bit trickier there. Yep. Any thoughts on how you've, and I know you cover the globe, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and sorry, I generally think of the 3 big markets when I'm talking, because quite a lot of those companies are looking at those markets, but obviously LATAM is huge. India also enormous, and we do quite a few investments into India. Yes, I would say I can talk personally around India and Japan as 2 areas that I know about. So India, we've done now, I think, 3 or 4 robotics investments into the space, mostly around logistics. There's big opportunities there. In each case, the appeal that they had with us, that the founders had with us, was really our ability to help them through our connections in Shenzhen to source components and speed up their time to market. Almost, even in India, where you've got like this huge amount of human capital, right? Some of the best engineers in the world are there, and the cost is way lower than anywhere else that you'll find for a large, for a very large collective of engineers. The 60 to 70% of the components of everything that they do still comes from Shenzhen. And there's, wherever you've got a country that's got any sort of supply chain restrictions, it's a challenge. It does slow things down. So being able to kind of hop over to Shenzhen back in the days before COVID was a really big value. At the moment, what we're doing is we're just kind of helping remotely in Shenzhen. So we've still got all of our engineers there, and they just kind of help connect with the factories. And then we rely quite a bit on sending components and semi-made parts to some of the startups that we work with. Does that answer the question?
Somewhat. Actually, the question came from Africa, so that's even maybe less so than
Yeah,
India or LATAM.
yeah. So yeah, it's same. And that, so I think my fastest growing company at the moment is in Africa, and they have the same issue, and they have to just rely on Shenzhen. They have somebody in Hong Kong who helps them with that. But yeah, it's a real challenge. It is a real challenge. Just because there isn't the infrastructure there of components, and relying on courier services to get stuff over is slow.
Okay. Since this touches on Shenzhen, John from Abbey, let me just let you unmute and ask your question directly.
Hi, thanks, Duncan. So yeah, my question is on. So we're making embedded systems for a robotic smart wheelchair with cloud connectivity, and I'm facing a challenge. I've got crackerjack engineer in Shenzhen, did my motor drive, but developing the cloud, the user interface, the second kind of controller, and full stack cloud developer, I'm having a hard time finding talent that can really integrate those two projects. And I'm concerned about, like full stack guys on putting repos up on Git and kind of doing a nice workflow. And then the guys in Shenzhen are kind of got everything in Kiel on their laptop. So I'm kind of trying to is there, and as you're building your Newark facility, are there like places where I can tap into recruit senior engineers who might be able to lead a team and build that, but I want to kind of do that out of the US and integrate those resources?
Yeah, I would, this is a classic example of where remote working doesn't work, right? And things were so good through COVID unexpectedly for us, but then we hit roadblocks around this exact area where you've got teams that you have integration of systems and cloud-based processing. You kind of need to have those two teams sat in the same room, or you just rely on things moving over. There is no hack for that. What we do is we have obviously some engineers in Newark, and then we have a very close, tight-knit relationship with the engineers in Shenzhen. They can have a look at things and then say, yes, this is about right, and then send it over. But ultimately, we still rely on a supply chain to get that over. And that was the magic of, earlier, we used to take international teams to Shenzhen for a short period, because the sad thing about not being able to access Shenzhen is the slow bit is much faster there, the hardware parts, right? So ideally, what you really want to do is you want to take the cloud people over to Shenzhen, and they will work on it together, and they can get 3 months cracked out in a month, right? But unfortunately, at the moment, you just have to rely on getting the parts sent over. And
so I'm not alone, but thanks.
Sorry.
Appreciate that.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Thanks so much.
It's slowed things down quite a bit.
Yes, I'm going to turn to David from Voltfang, but I'll mention our applicant from Canada suggests that Canada is a great opportunity for affordable developers.
Canada is great. Yeah. We've got a huge number of companies in Canada, actually. Yeah.
But David, if you can unmute, you had a question about EVs. It looked they have a battery box much like the one you showed, Duncan. So go ahead.
The funny part is here that we, as Volt Storage, they are also a German-based company which does redox flow. We do second life batteries, so we take EV batteries out of when they reach end of life and put them in storage systems. And as Volt Storage, we also started with a residential, and then we switched off to the commercial side. And my question regards to the fundraising, because in Germany, also Europe, the people are more scared of hardware. Should we maybe also look for American investors because they are less afraid of it? Or how do you see the fundraising of a hardware startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just look as a whole, obviously, the US has got a very robust venture capital scene, and you'd be remiss not to be exposing yourself to that. I do think that, though, I wouldn't confine it to Germany. I'd say in Europe, there are a huge number of climate tech VCs, and they will fund companies that are particularly addressing the areas that you are. And you just, I mean, they may not, not everyone may like investing in hard tech or hardware, but you just kind of have to. It's going to be very difficult to save the planet with software alone. I would say that's an important point, that there's these new funds constantly coming up at the moment, and as long as you're hitting the climate tech angle and you are really showing positive impact there, I think that Europe is a good place.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'll ask a couple of other folks to speak for just a minute. Since, Duncan, you mentioned food technology, we have one online. Elon from AMI has a sugar substitute, and he'd originally asked if you were just interested in sick care or also in food, but you obviously are. Elon, do you want to just mention a minute what you're doing to Duncan?
Yeah, hi, Duncan. So we make designer proteins for the mass food and feed market, proteins which would be fit as to stability, taste, allergenicity, amino acid content, and others. The first product is Swilin, the first tasty, healthy, and sustainable sweetener, which can enable up to 70% sugar reduction without hampering taste. Now, when I speak with a lot of the health investors, they tell me, well, if someone is sick, we'll be happy to get a remedy or a drug or something for that, while we are doing something which, from my point of view, is much bigger, and that is preventive medicine, as sugar underlies a metabolic syndrome. So what's your view of preventive medicine?
Yes, so this is definitely an area that is exciting to SOSV, but more in the indie-bio space, so the life sciences space. So there's a whole group and a team there that would be excited to chat about what you're doing. For me, it's outside of my area of expertise in that space, but within healthcare, we're more on the digital health side. We do obviously then a little bit into bioproduction, but we're not actually into the production of foods or of
production for us is just a minor issue. We do use computational protein design and very heavy cloud computing, but obviously at the end of the day, we do have a white powder that we like to sell.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, and then Court, if you'd like to unmute. I was actually pleased, Duncan, to see you mention mining, because nobody ever mentions mining, but we have a very strong XTC in Australia, and amazingly in Australia, they keep coming up with very innovative mining companies. And interestingly, we sometimes have to say, I thought mining was, a cardinal sin. And it's like, no, you got to mine stuff. You might as well do it sustainably. And so we've had a number, and one of those is Max Mine. And so, Kurt, if you'd like to maybe mention a little bit what you're doing to Duncan.
Sure. Thank you. And yeah, I'm glad I don't have to explain. I'm doing crypto mining because that's what the month ago.
I should have prefaced. I didn't mean crypto mining. Yeah.
Correct. No. I've chosen the background, so hopefully that helps. So MaxMine is a vertically integrated, all the way from hard tech at the edge that needs to survive Mars, really. These machines, the things can't break, they're quite remote, and in some places very expensive to get back there. So we have edge tech, which is what my question is, and then a very complex AI cloud data processing that then also gets hardwired into, not as digitally adaptive businesses as you'd find. So we do a lot of gamification of operators and change the behavior to let them drive. So basically Formula One performance of drivers in the mine site. And to give you an idea, if you drive 0.1 miles an hour faster, it's about $25 million more revenue because you build a better conveyor belt of trucks. So it's huge. And we've just built a new product. It's not quite a pivot, but it's a pivot on the 6 million hours of data we've got, which is, and I like your thing, like real carbon reduction, about 5 to 20% based on how productive they are. And you optimize not for speed, but for momentum. So it's a real big mass balance and a lot of clever maths at the back end. So we've been running for about 5 years and it's going pretty well, but running into all the good problems that come with scaling. One of the things that for us is to mining is a high margin business, but it's a difficult sales market, and we've got enormous headroom to grow. But we're also starting to prepare for the next adjacent industry, which is road transport. And to do that, we need to half our hardware cost at least twice. And so when you started talking about, iterating your hardware quickly, I was nodding because, we really admire the SpaceX approach for rapid iteration of hardware. We have two challenges right now, and you touched a little bit on supply chain, and we're finding that we're doing more design work to make up for, building the next version of hardware because the component's out. And so we have to redesign the board that we just designed for a component that we can no longer get. So we're getting good at the speed, but we can't commit to minimum batch sizes, all those things. So I don't know if you've got a little bit of advice on how you work around it. Maybe we're just getting fit at change. So maybe that's worthwhile. But the real other challenge for us is if we get things wrong, we kill people. So we've got a 350-ton truck with 300 tons of payload on it. And that's a very dangerous thing. And so we're always trying to find the balance between iterating quickly, safety, and then for us, reliability is critically important. It's not consumers. I don't know if you've got any comment on those 2 points.
Well, you've got a nightmare at the moment because the supply chain is completely screwed for a load of the components you're going to be using. So what you're probably having to do is buy gray market components and then design around them and then test them and validate it because before you manufacture. So hopefully that's going to go. Is that what's happening to you at the moment? Must be.
So we in April last year, we went and secured a whole bunch.
Oh, you did a load. Okay.
And we just threw a lot of money at it. And scarily, funny thing happened, they sold some of our components without telling us. But we're building the next version of our technology. Yeah. And we found having an embedded Taiwanese speaker into our team here, we could get certain components. We try and avoid certain political challenges with sourcing certain components from certain jurisdictions. So we prefer Europe, Taiwan, and Japan for our components, which does add complexity. So we stayed away from grey market. But the volumes are hundreds, not thousands.
Yeah,
and a batch.
I mean, it's good that you did that. I mean, so what I'm normally advising people is go for grey market stuff at the moment. If you're trying to, if you want to just figure out what you can get quickly and test out in the field, secure those first, and then design to those. I think the biggest challenge you've got at the moment is you're trying to reduce the cost of the components. Those are all going up. So you're having to look at new alternatives, and then you don't know if you're going to be able to get the supply of those new alternatives.
I should add that the thing is, in mining, they've always been overpriced. So we think that even with the new component pricing, we can still get 2 halvings out of the cost. So we're currently about 10 grand for a whole bunch of things. We think we get it down to 5, and we can see a pathway to 2 grand.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. And there'll be enabling technology comes along, as it always does. Whenever you've got a kind of a high price point in an area which is expanding, a company comes along and produces something which is 1/10 of the price. And so definitely keeping your ear to the ground on that and getting development started as early as possible when a supply comes up with a new component is something that I encourage teams in your.
And just on not taking too much time, but how do you advise people to trade off safety and not get the teams to be too careful? I mean, I'm looking at our friend with wheelchairs. That's the same problem he'd probably have.
It's an impossible question to answer, right? How safe?
I think also that's the opportunity. Everyone's so scared,
Yeah. It's impossible to answer. Yeah, I mean, the fallout of producing something which is not safe will kill a company.
Yeah, thank you. I'll leave it there. I think it doesn't have to be safe on the workbench. Our philosophy there is it can break on the workbench. It can break in the digital.
As long as it doesn't break. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, a couple of different questions. One is to take a bit of a tangent. One of our applicants is asking about Web3. And as you may know, we have a whole separate competition on Web3 going on right now. But a number of the companies in our main competition are using this in various aspects. What's your view just about its general promise and utility for hardware and hard tech types of applications?
Interesting. So we actually have a Web3 group at SOSV called DLab. And then we also have, you know, a range of different Web3 investments through MOX and China Accelerator, which is another two programs that we run. As it relates to hardware, you know, I think it's still early days. I think overall, a trustless system is a great, provides a huge amount of value for certain industries. And certainly within hardware, you know, as can seen with Helium, there's a really, so Helium is a company you should check out, that basically rewards people for installing hardware. In this case, I believe it was routers. A way to kind of encourage people to, or companies to install some piece of hardware and then run that and be rewarded for that through Web3 is a really interesting business model, and that creates a load of opportunity. I would say we're very early on in Web3 in general over the whole industry. I know there's a lot of excitement there. Do I think it's important? Yeah, absolutely. Do I have all of the answers? No, I don't have a single one at the moment. I'm just watching it carefully. But yeah, I think there are some big advantages to applying that thinking to how kind of hardware as a service could compensate people.
Okay. And then Paul Bogar, you had a couple of questions. Don't have much time, but I want to go to your first one about the timeframes of hardware versus software. Do you want to present that? And then we can talk a little bit back about Shenzhen.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. I mean, just a general problem, hardware versus software, that hardware takes longer, more money to develop, reach the market. I usually turn it back and say to investors that actually it might not be always a disadvantage. It can be an advantage, a competitive advantage, because whatever takes you a long time to develop and get to the market, it will take the same amount of, more or less the same amount of long time for your competitors. So at that time, that so-called long time actually could be turned into your competitive advantage. Do you agree on that, or any comments on that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the classic adage, like software ate the world, but hardware gave it teeth. Like once you've got a piece of hardware there, you've got a moat. And you also have, if you've installed into an infrastructure, it's probably not going to be taken away. Whereas a piece of software which is easy to create is also easy to migrate from to another slightly better or slightly better promoted or slightly better funded piece of software. And so it's true that hardware takes longer and hardware is more expensive at the early stage. But actually, if you look at the later stages, you'll see that you know, SaaS often is more capital intensive to keep the growth and prevent the churn than a hardware enabled software company.
So you can present this argument to investors. Do they understand what you are talking about this timing business? Sometimes I have time to get the message across.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're talking to an investor who's made billions from SaaS, it might be difficult to convince them. but there are some good examples online of this that you can show. And you know, I think playing. I do think that if you can find kind of examples where retention has been an issue, and you can show that it's not with hardware-enabled software, then I think it's a strong proposition. At least that's why we like investing in the space.
Okay, thanks.
And
John, shall I go on with my Shenzhen question?
Well, I'll summarize that because there are several questions along this thread, which is that hardware. I mean, software has a lot of IP, but there's some hardware things and markets that may be restricted in terms of dealing with China, or you may feel your IP is exposed there, but you really like to get into the market. And since you spent a lot of time there, what are sort of your thoughts on navigating both restrictions, but also opportunities? And also a lot of people worry that if they open their shirt in China, that they're lost. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. This is a popular question for me, as you can imagine. So I think that there's a common misconception that you sort of get. Oh, explain this. I'd say it's a spectrum. Okay, so you've got like outright intellectual property theft, state-sponsored stuff, which is bad, but typically happens for very large companies. And then you've got kind of you've got sort of luxury goods that get copied by manufacturers and get sold in different routes to market than in kind of traditional luxury realm. And those are kind of the two extremes that we see more of. In the middle, where you're talking about kind of technology startups, actually, it's not really so common for those to be copied. And I think there's less risk there. And this, with the exception of anything in manufacturing technology, if you've got a very unique piece of manufacturing technology, I think it's risky to take it to anywhere that makes a large amount of money from manufacturing and then share all of your IP. I think that there's overall, though, you're unlikely to get copied by your suppliers because your suppliers want to be a customer of yours. What's more likely to happen is that when you're very successful, somebody would look at your technology and then reverse engineer it, and you don't need to be in China for that to happen. So that's kind of one of the risks. I think there's good ways to mitigate against this. So, quite a lot of what our companies will do is they will, number one, software. If you've got a software layer on top of that and it's all encrypted, then you're fairly well protected. And hopefully the hardware is something which is just fairly easy to produce and therefore doesn't have the value, but the value is in the software. If the value is in the hardware, and particularly if it's like mechanically sophisticated or if it's got some chemical components in it that are unique, one great mitigation strategy is just to make sure that you have a different suppliers that are not known to each other, so you can then source from different areas. They're not able to pull things together themselves, and so you can protect yourself that way.
Okay, and let's see, we have just a couple minutes left. Zane, let me unmute you, or why don't you unmute you and ask your question. This is about in fintech trying to be digital, but inevitably having to plug into point of sale biometric hardware, which changes the cost dynamic, which is interesting. With a number of the fintechs are trying to, in a way, get out of hardware, but keep getting dragged back into that.
Okay, so thank you very much. Yeah, hi Duncan. Okay, so basically, we are sitting in a population where you have a large unbanked population, and we're talking about like 90 million, 100 million people, and then you have this literacy rate that is 68%, 70%. So there's a challenge where you're trying to directly shift these people to, excuse me, change from cash-based to cashless. So you want to be like seamless. Once we raised our funding, we came to know that in order to make them adopt to these trends, you need to go through a proper banked process, because these people are either underbanked or unserved. So they don't know what a card is. They don't understand what a bank account is. They don't understand what is the advantage, what is the limit. They're scared of taxations. They're scared of disclosing their income or spendings. So ultimately, we were forced to go into a PSO PSP licensing. Like they said, okay, just go with a bank, the IBFT, the fund transfers. So my question is that when we are adopting to these kind of systems, what do you think? Is there any alternative, or is there any other? Because I have done a lot of reading. I've studied a lot of case studies, and I am not able to find a way where you can bypass this, because ultimately these do increase the cost. But of course, this also brings in business, because the adoption rate goes it goes very high. And we're talking with the state bank in our country to enable a fingerprint. Like, for example, you don't need to go for biometric verification. You can use a camera that can use OCR technology, take on the thumbprint, send it to the national identification database, get the data back, and open the level 1 account directly. So we are doing this. That is helping us. But ultimately, these people are like, okay, you have done this. Now, what is a card? I need a card. And if you give them a card, they say like, okay, where will I swap it? And we have only 93,000 POS machines in the whole country. We're talking about 2 million merchants. So then, it becomes another business. So do you think like fintech can survive without this?
Are you talking about without hardware or without the banking the existing banking infrastructure?
Without the hardware, because you see, we don't put a compulsion on our client or our user that you have to download our app to be our customer. Our shops are basically enabled for banking, financial, and commerce transactions. We started with selling bus tickets, air tickets.
Yeah.
So
you're trying to do it without authenticating through a smart device.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's theoretically possible, but why? Why would you do it without? I mean, it'd be much easier just to authenticate through the smart device, right? That's what. There's a huge number of businesses doing that. But yeah, theoretically it's possible. I mean, there's all sorts of cool stuff that people are experimenting with, like chips embedded into people's bodies, and other kind of unique biometric signals that can tell. But yeah, I don't think it makes sense at the moment because there is such a good authentication ecosystem already working on smartphones.
Yeah, it's like starting from the very basics, like you cannot bring innovation. You're like 15 years behind the market trend.
Yeah.
But then you have like the top of the pyramid that you have to serve, where you need to be at the best of your user experience. And then you also have to deal with the unbanked population, which is not a part of the
who don't have smartphones. Yeah, I get it.
No, they do have smartphones. Well, they have smartphones, but they're not tech savvy.
We'll have to cut that off because we're getting to the top of the hour. But thank you very much for that, and obviously some more discussion to be had there. Very interesting. We are at the top of the hour, and I want to also draw people's attention to thank them. There's been a lot of back and forth within the chat among the startups. We very much appreciate that. Suggestions of going to different sources in different countries for resources. Thank you very much, Duncan, for your time and for your broad coverage. And several people have said they really appreciated having a session on hardware because you don't see that often in accelerator programs. So we very much appreciate that. And we appreciate the support of SOSV. We had Nick Plant from your data side judging our Web3. We've done some events at IndieBio, so we very much appreciate the ongoing relationship. That will be it for today, for this show. If you'll please come back in an hour, we have another session this morning on business culture and diversity, which will be very interesting with one of our sponsors, Cadence. So that'll be in about 55 minutes. And that will be it for this morning. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Duncan. Great talk.